a health community, an early educator, and a parenting and children's book author. And I previously served as director of innovation at the University of Nebraska School of Public Health, and am now actually on faculty at Penn State University's Prevention Research Center. And my career, while I always say it's eclectic, it's primarily been focused on promoting health and well-being and addressing the most pressing needs of children, families, and communities, both in the US and internationally. And in addition to interests that relate sort of from everything from injury prevention to health technology innovation, I've been an early literacy advocate for over 25 years. I've served as a media spokesperson for the American Academy of Pediatrics. I owned an educational childcare center with 200 students for almost 10 years. And I've written over 30 books, almost all of which have been either parenting or children's books. And over the past 5 years in particular, my work's been focused squarely on the 21st century skill development area, and across the age and learning continuum, drawing sort of on everything from early brain and child development and the social determinants of health to the changing face of K-12 and higher education and the future of work, all of which served as the focus for my most recent TED Talk, and also a book I wrote called The Toddler Brain: Nurture the Skills Today That Will Shape Your Child's Tomorrow. So I really look forward to jumping in on this conversation with all of you.
Thanks, Laura. You bring a wealth of experience to the conversation. Justin?
Wow, that was extremely impressive. I'm impressed. I was taking notes when you were talking. I'm Justin Alio, husband, father of three, father of a high school student, middle school student, and elementary student. So Laura, I'll take some of your topics any day and advice because I need it. I'm also a former teacher, principal of elementary, middle school, and high school, district level leader as well. And now I'm the founding senior director of the Readiness Institute at Penn State Outreach Initiative. It was originally started by the Heinz Endowments in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, who funded the project and wanted to make sure students are not just successful in getting into college and post-secondary careers, but successful once they're in college and post-secondary careers. So our work is very complementary to the work that school districts do. We work with them. We do in-action programs, summertime, out of school, in-school programs. We also do a lot of strategic planning with school districts as well. So Lindsay, I'm super excited to be here today. Thank you so much.
Great, and thank you both so much. And our panelists, before I jump into the first question, I do want to let the audience know, feel free to use the chat. We absolutely want to be taking questions, and we'll be sure to be checking those throughout and trying to get those in front of Justin and Laura as soon as we can. Just in terms of structure, we're going to have Justin and Laura be kind of leading the conversation here, the first part of the event. We're going to do a little trivia in the middle to do some transition to our panelists afterwards. And then we'll have some Q&A to wrap up at the end, right around 5:30. So I do have a list of some pretty big questions that I'm very hopeful you can answer, and I'm hopeful are reflective of some of the things that all of us are wanting some answers to. So to kick it off, I'd just like to start the conversation by asking each of you what your perspective is on children and youth mental health and what you believe that means for the future in education. And
Laura,
however you, yep.
You're so gracious, Justin. No, I'm happy to jump in on that one because, I like to always start out a discussion around mental health. Obviously, I come from the medical world in terms of my background. And I've always pointed out that it's been pretty ironic that what we've called mental health has traditionally been a discussion of mental illness. Right. So that's one of the problems we've had. And the other one, and it's reflective of the fact that we tend to deal with things when they become really serious diagnosable problems. And then the other one is that even within the healthcare realm, it's been stigmatized, right? So that it's not something that we freely talk about. People like to talk about their health, but they don't tend to have this open conversation about mental health. And what I'd like to, kind of conclude that concept at least with is the idea that we don't have to look to the extremes of the, schizophrenia and bipolar disorder and sort of the traditional mental illness to realize that mental health is important to all of us. It's a continuum. And in fact, what the science and research and evidence-based tells us is there's an awful lot we can do to promote mental health and at the same time prevent some of the mental illness that we see. So I'm really excited about that opportunity in mental health now.
Thank you, Laura. Excuse me. So we're suffering some mental health right now in my house. We're all COVID right now. Well, I should say half of us are going through testing. The other half is COVID positive. So we're living this as we speak right now. So I apologize a little bit if I get some coughing going on here today. But
Justin, I don't think there's a person on the planet who wouldn't sympathize with you at the moment. So no need to apologize.
well,
Keeping it real. Yeah.
what you said I wrote down because, I remember, when we had mental health or like you said, mental illness issues in the school level, we'd always look at that as like, oh no, we have to call the guidance counselor. Oh no, we have to get the social worker, somebody else involved. That's your thing. That's your specialty. So now, my perspective, and one of the reasons why we opened up our institute and social emotional learning is #1 in our chart is because it can no longer be this, oh, and we need to go get someone else. It's all of our jobs. And so we think social emotional learning, it's not just something that we teach in isolation. It has to be embedded. We all have to take ownership of it. And that's not just the future, that's the present. We used to ask guidance counselor and teachers used to strategize and say, you got this, I have this. Now they're working together to figure out how they can solve solutions, and teachers can learn from guidance counselors. I was part of a conversation with a group of guidance counselors. 5 years ago, a guidance counselor will handle the situation. Now teachers are asking guidance counselors, hey, I have this situation. I don't want you to handle it. I want you to teach me how to handle it. So we're seeing a whole reversal in education. And I'm thinking also as a parent, I live it every day of high school, middle school, and elementary students going through this at home, and what it is from a parent's perspective, an educator's perspective, an educational leader's perspective. So to your point, Laura, it's no longer this secondary thing that we think about. It's this primary concern that we think about. And as far as literacy, math, social emotional learning should not just be taught as a warm-up activity or something we pull from, or shouldn't be an afterthought in the budget or curriculum. It should be part of all of that. And I do see a big shift in that, to Lindsay's point of all the statistics at the beginning, because people are not just hearing statistics anymore, but they're seeing statistics in front of them, and it's becoming personal. And that's why we're seeing this big shift happening right now, because like before COVID, I was thinking, oh, that poor family down the street has COVID. Oh, well, I'll call, see if they need it. Now we're living it. It's like, so it's personal through us, right? So I think, but educators and parents are living through all this right now. So it's no longer the future. Social emotional learning, it's the present. And I think overall collectively that we are doing a pretty good job with it, but we still have a lot to learn. And that's the thing. We will never stop learning. And once we say, oh, we figured it out, that's when we know we have to go back to the drawing board, because we still have a lot to learn.
I've been like vigorously writing things down between both of your responses. And so kind of to summarize, what I'm hearing is that this is a collective kind of collaborative response that we need to have within the education setting. And Justin, to your point, I would say when there was a time when anything related to mental or emotional health, call the counselor, call the social worker, this isn't my job. And I think we're starting to see why that needs to take a priority in the classroom, so that teachers are actually starting to respond to that. And I love when you said that the counselor is now seen as more of a consultant, almost like, teach me these things so that I can directly have an impact on my students. The one question that I have, that perhaps some of the folks in the audience have, and it's really based on conversations that we've had with real schools, real educators, real administrators. I think there's still a struggle with teachers saying two things. One, social emotional learning is one more thing. And two, I'm not trained to do this. So considering the facts that we just talked about, considering that we are living this and we're all going through this, and we know that there's a mental health crisis, and we know that the shift needs to happen. And we do see, on one side of the fence, we do see schools that are able to, are moving in that direction, and they're making that shift. But I will say, I feel like we still have conversations where there is a struggle that we can't do it all, and we're still trying to do everything we were doing before the pandemic, and now you're trying to throw this one more thing. And even though I know my students need it, I don't know how to do it. So
Lindsay,
I
I don't think Justin's going to argue with me if I say it is the one thing, right? It's not one more thing. And in fact, first of all, I'll tell you, as a pediatrician who tried to introduce early literacy and reach out and read into a pediatric office, or car seat safety into the pediatric office, I always got, it's just one more thing. And I'm sympathetic to that, both to pediatricians, to educators, because it is one more thing, right? But when you look at what has the most impact on children's lives, their health, their success, their thriving, those sorts of things, we really need to prioritize, right? The other part of that, I'm not trained in it. Well, that's true for both sectors. And what I'm seeing is, this focus on social emotional learning, which I'm thrilled about. Justin, clearly you are. The increased interest is out of necessity because people's awareness now is way up from where it was before. But I'll tell you, it goes by lots of different names, right? Social emotional learning sounds like it's one more thing for curriculum, but I'll tell you, it is all over the jobs, workforce, innovation, leadership space. It is all over the healthcare space. People use different language for what they call it. It ties in with all of the mental health issues. And then when you get to this, you're not trained in, well, that's partly the goal that we all have, is helping the people who can be most influential for children develop the skills they need, right? And the supports that they need to be able to implement social emotional learning and development. But I'll tell you, even for the people who say, yeah, but what about the metrics, right? Educators are held accountable to a lot, pediatricians and healthcare providers are. People in business, you need to meet business metrics and outcomes. And what we find in the research is that if you look at enhanced social emotional skill development, you not only see enhanced social emotional skill development, but you would see enhanced reading, writing, arithmetic skills and business metrics and productivity and engagement and all these things that we already are used to paying attention to. So that's sort of what I tell people when they say it's one more thing. First of all, if you're going to argue, it's the thing right now. Everything
I
else,
like that.
Yeah, everything else starts to fall in place, not completely solved. But if you don't have this, you don't have the foundation that everything else is built on.
So,
Great. Yeah.
So speaking of foundations, we have school districts, right? And from a district's perspective, we go in every single year, we say, okay, here are the 3 things we were going to focus on this year that came out of last year. It could be this, it could be that, or whatever. School districts in general will say, you need to teach this. And to your point, Lindsay, it's and one type thing, right? Teach us on top of it. Because that's what is, nice in the newsletters. But when school districts, and I do think we are doing this, and if you're a school district leader, you have to do this. You have to make it priority 1, 2, or 3, or 1A, 1B, whatever, at the district level, to flow down to the school level, to flow down to the teacher level. Because what that does ensures accountability on every level. That ensures system support on every level. That ensures resources on every level. Without those things, we could say you have to do this or do that, but all we're setting ourselves up for is failure and something that's a trend. And we know this is not a trend. This is something that's here and it's going to continue to be here over and over again. Something that's probably, quite frankly, should have been here 10 years ago. And then we look at this and we say, as a teacher, okay, yes, I do get a day of professional training on this. I should get it. And more than this, think of a school district. Why do students go to school? Why do students go to school? To learn and math, science, social studies. But if students are not socially, emotionally not ready to learn, and if they don't have this sense of belonging, here's a news flash. They will not learn science, math, literacy. So that's why we have to attack that first. And that's why things like inclusivity tied with social emotional learning, this sense of belonging is so important in schools. But you have to look at, where's my budget? If I'm spending $1 million on a turf football field, if I'm spending $700,000 on the math curriculum, and I'm spending $0 on social emotional curriculum, and I found this free resource out there, that shows you, to your public, to your taxpayers, to the statistics out there of what you value as a school leader.
Mm.
So you really have to invest into your community if you want to meet your overall goals as a school district, because remember, school districts, we are servant learners. We're servants to the community. Our job is not just prepare students to go on to college and jobs. It's to care, it's to learn all aspects of life. So it has to start at that district level and work its way down or not be fully supported.
Now, you hit, I think, a lot of really important points. I want to go back a little bit, Justin, to something that you said, that cannot just be checking a box. And I think
Well, that goes back to culture. That goes
yes,
back to
I was just going
culture.
to say, this has been, yep.
Yeah, because I used to train principals, and at a principals one time said, I can't get our teachers on the right page. No matter what I do, I can't get them to trust me to come in their classroom. I'm doing everything I'm supposed to do. I'm doing a walkthrough. I'm doing this. I'm doing that. Everything I learned, I'm supposed to do as a principal. And I said, that's called checking the box. If you want to build culture, you have to intentionally do things every single day. Stand at the front door, say good morning. Donuts on Friday. Take that checklist. Those are things if you want to play it safe and keep your job. But if you want to move the needle and transform culture and make change for good, you need to do those other things that are not in that checking box area.
Relationship building, building trust, building relationships, value. That's another highlight that I mentioned. What is your value as a school? Like when a community is looking at their district, what are they showing in terms of decisions that they're making and prioritizing? So I think from our perspective at Teamology, we've certainly been at this social emotional wellness, social and emotional learning for a long time. And we've said that the silver lining, I do believe, of the pandemic for us is there's finally it's connecting, right? And I know, Laura, I thought of you as Justin was talking about, you cannot learn. I know you've talked about the brain science behind social emotional, so I'd love for you to share some of that with the audience. But when kids are really struggling social, emotionally, with mental health, list goes on and on, they can't learn. So I'm going to kick it over to you to kind of share some of that wisdom.
Well, there's a really quick, I've given probably over 100 talks now on this subject, and it's for everybody from state superintendent associations to pediatricians to Fortune 100 business CEOs. And one of the phrases that really resonates with people is that you can't, and it actually it's a quote from one of our past Surgeon Generals who said, you can't educate a child who's not healthy, and you can't keep a child healthy who's not educated. Right. Thanks, Justin. And the thing is, if you're going to talk about healthy, there's certainly the, if a child's sick or if a child has COVID, healthy, but even stands more to reason that if your brain functions to help you focus and pay attention and engage and learn and do all these things that we want, and you've got issues with mental health and well-being around stress, anxiety, even just the lack of trust, which even at a very foundational level, this is what you've heard me say a million times, Lindsay, because in the first TED Talk I gave, I actually talked about the 5 connections that will change children's lives. And the first of the 5 were the connecting of neurons in the developing brain. And here's what we know. The quick version of what we know about the neuroscience of brain development in childhood is that it's literally determined by your environment. And by environment, I mean, yes, all of what goes around you, but most significantly by the caring, responsive adults or lack thereof in your environment. So the brain is this amazing, part of our body that is designed to change its shape, structure, and function based on the interactions it has with the world and with individuals. And that is true. This is how I seamlessly go between pediatrics to education to workforce, is a caring, responsive adult is the critical factor. And this is where for teachers, what I'm always struck by is teachers are some of the most creative people. Like, I don't think I'm the one who needs to explain to a teacher that if a kid's sick, they're not going to learn very well. Or that if you get kids up moving around, hands-on, get to do a project, they're way more excited about learning the same concept than if you sit them in front of a worksheet. at the same time, giving them those tools and the understanding, I think, is really empowering for teachers. But yes, it's all intertwined. The teachers play a critical role. You know, we always hear parent is the number one teacher. Yeah, but teachers are playing that same caring, responsive role. And it does tie in with health on all sorts of levels.
Laura, you said something really, you know, we talk about a systems approach, but you said tools. I tell you what, the best way to find out, and you said something also, teachers are absolutely the heart and soul of a school district. There's no doubt about it. You know, when I was a principal, I used to walk around and I learned more about teaching when I was a principal because I got to go watch everyone all the time and just like, holy cow, this is awesome. And when we chose curriculum, whether it was social, emotional curriculum, math, I never chose the curriculum. I put a committee together and I let them pick it. My philosophy was, hey, you're going to teach it. Like, you're the experts. Like, I don't teach third grade right now. I don't teach ninth grade. You teach it. My job is to come out and research, get the best ones in front of you, and let's go through a design process to pick it. Because at the end of the day, you're going to teach us. And you have to give the teachers the tools they need. It's kind of like an artist, right? Or a mechanic. If I don't have the right tool, I can't fix a car. So going back to the classroom, if teachers are going online and they're getting freemium subscriptions, videos that they're finding on their own, they may teach social emotional learning, but are students going to learn the social emotional learning? There's a big difference there. So it has to be a way where if I'm a second grade teacher, my colleague down the hall is teaching second grade, we have to kind of teach the same thing so good teachers can share best practices back and forth. They can go to an in-service day and say, in this session, what I did today, I did this. Oh, can I come watch you? You have to, and that goes back to the building level. You have to set that environment and culture up to allow that to happen. But you couldn't say anything, but teachers are the heart and soul of the school, no doubt. They will transform everything. And we need to make sure they have the right tools, not just tools, the right tools to do the work they need.
And you know, Justin, you said about checking boxes. I'm just going to say, as somebody who's a little type A who gets a lot of satisfaction at the end of the day of checking a bunch of boxes off of what I did, that's great for the end of the day. I did, you know, these things, but that doesn't give me a sense of purpose. And part of the goal here is that when teachers have a sense of purpose, that they can contribute, that there's a goal, that they're contributing to something bigger than themselves, which is kind of why teachers go into teaching, right? It's not for the money, right? We all know that it's not. You go into it, that when you do that. So when I speak to audiences, I have a different agenda for everyone I speak to. I'm looking at Amanda's comment in the chat here. When I talk to business leaders and policymakers, I'm trying to convince them that this is where the money needs to be spent, right? Or when I'm talking to pediatricians, I'm saying why this is their business, like this is important to them. When I'm talking to teachers and educators, I'm like, do you understand what an amazing thing you're doing? Like you have so much impact, like this, the work. And for teachers who are really good, first of all, they can always want to look to see what else they could be doing. So sometimes I talk and they're like, oh, I wasn't doing that. But for a lot of them, they just didn't realize they're kind of going through the motion, checking the boxes until they realize how critically important a role they play in the culture, the students, the outcome, the social, emotional, and academic outcomes for these kids. That's part of my goal, is to really make sure teachers realize it, because to me, that's very empowering. I assume that's why most teachers go into the field, is that's what they actually went into it for.
Yeah, that gave me chills thinking about from an educator's perspective, Laura. And I want to go back to some of the statistics I was sharing earlier before we started the questions. When we're thinking about the ratios of psychologists to students, counselors to students, the fact that there's some studies out there showing that 50% of teachers in some of the reports are considering leaving the profession. So, we're obviously very focused on helping kids in terms of social emotional, but I think we need to take a step back and I think we have a lot that we need to be doing for educators as well in terms of their social, more emotional and mental wellness. And I guess it kind of leads beautifully into one of my questions. I'm going off script a little bit, which is what I always try to do. So this is great. But I do want to make sure I ask this question. So Justin, you kept referring to, we need to give the teachers the resources to be able to do the work that they are doing. Do you think, based on some of the data that I shared at the beginning, some of what we are talking about, do you think educators have what they need as far as resources to meet the social and emotional and mental health needs of kids? And why or why not? And I'm sure that it's a loaded question, so totally understand,
Yeah.
take it.
It's a loaded question, but there's always going to be one answer to that. And it's no. And it's because we have, and it will always be no, because learners change. We have new students coming in our class every year. I remember when I was a principal, 4th grade teacher, she had a very tough year, very some challenging students. And I would go in her room, she would stay later, she would cry sometimes. And I was just like, oh man, like what can we do to help? And she said something to me that stuck with me forever. And I always tell this. She said, it's okay. I was like, you know what? I'm being challenged and I'm learning like I've never learned before. And so next year, if this happens again, I'll be ready for it. I never was challenged like this before. So to your point, we will never have all the tools, but once we stop trying to find those tools and talking about this and talking and allowing voice, we always talk about giving kids voice and choice. We have to allow teachers voice and choice. You have to set up professional development where it's not someone getting up in front and talking about this is the rules of the school this year. This is what we are going to do. You have to give teachers, say, almost in a ed camp style philosophy. What professional development do you need? We did that. That was our first professional development in October. And the number one thing, you're actually, I didn't even think about this. Number one thing, teacher mental health. That was the number one thing they said they wanted training on. So we had one teacher come in, we rotated around. One teacher volunteered to teach yoga. One teacher volunteered her life story of suffering with anxiety and what she does. One teacher brought in about having help pets at home are a great resource for them. And it wasn't so much the tools, it was allowing, and go back to resources, time and space to talk about these things. Happy hour, teachers go have, no, set it up in your school and allow them to talk in your school. And it's very tough, right? Because we already have so many in service days, and now there's no subs, and it's getting harder and harder. But we have to allow those times and resources, because there never will be enough resources out there. We're never going to get 100% correct, but we have to keep trying. And when we don't try, that's when we don't see success in the school. So, but I have to go relationships, culture, having that open line of communication, listening. I remember at the ASCD conference in Chicago, I was introduced on stage in front of a big crowd. And they said, now introducing Justin Alio, a futurist in education. I'm walking the stage, I'm like, what the heck's a futurist? I'm thinking like, I don't want people to think I'm like reading whatever. So I get on stage, and I was like, I was thinking about that walking the stage, futurist. And to me, it's very simple. A futurist is someone that listens to the people they serve and then support them. Because that's how you design the future that you envision and make it come to life, is when you listen and support the people you work with, what they want to do, and more likely it would happen.
Love it. Thank you for that. Laura, anything to add?
Oh, well, first of all, I'm just laughing because there was a time I got introduced to come up on stage for this really big conference, and they were building up like, you're not going to want to miss this person and everything. And I had one of those little VIP wristbands so I could sit in the speaker section of this like 10,000 person conference. And then they introduced me, and I just thought to myself, what a letdown. Like I thought I was going to get to meet something really cool. In terms of the future, I go to some of the things like the TED conference and South by Southwest and these things where all the self-proclaimed futurists are. And I never really understood this idea of the future is now, right? I'm like, what does that even mean? Yeah. But the idea that there are bits, if you listen and you're looking for signals, you can see where things are working for people, where it's not being done where you're at. And again, it doesn't have to be on like this wide scale and go meet with the top futurists in the world. It can be what's happening in the classroom. Maybe we haven't dealt with this before. How do we do this? How do we share it with others? How do we learn? And again, I mean, clearly, Justin, you deal in the world of design thinking and system change and all, but the idea behind design thinking is instead of saying, you know, at a school, we're going to come up, or in a hospital or wherever, we're going to come up with this plan and we're going to research it, we're going to do these, and then we're just going to go implement it. With design thinking, it's listening to what people's needs are. You start by listening, right? And I always, by the way, make the point, these are the skills we're trying to teach our kids with social emotional learning, right? You can make positive change, that you can be resilient if you can run into obstacles or challenges, that you can, but active listening is on the top of like the business lists, right? Like CEOs will tell you active listening is really important. So you listen to what the needs are, and what that's letting us do, you know, by the way, humans in general don't do really well with lots of change, right? Even the way our brains work, we take information in and we pack it into packages that were preset, like the way we've learned to interpret the world, and we just try to fit things into it. So the amount of change we're dealing with, at the same time, what we're trying to do in the school systems is say, we want you to accommodate kids on a personalized, customized level, at the exact same time that we still expect you to operationalize and scale this and meet all the, you know, check the box standards and things. And that's a really tall order. All sectors are dealing with it. But this idea of practicing, listening to what the real challenges are of the people who are facing them, and then saying, what can I do to help? I will tell you is the same shift we're seeing in parenting, in pediatrics. There's a shift to the caregiver. And it's not just like, oh, don't pay attention to the kids, but because all evidence suggests that the outcomes for children are better when the caregivers are supported and they have what they need. So again, I'm seeing it across all realms, but you really described that well in what you just said.
And that leads right into my next question, Laura. That was perfect. How can we, and I'm not even going to define we, I'm just going to kind of blanketly say we, support educators and families better right now? I know we haven't really pulled the idea of parents and families into the conversation yet, but I think they're a really critical piece of all of this. And there's so much struggle right now. So where do we even start in terms of support with all of the needs right now?
I can jump in with a couple quick answers, and I'll give Justin some time to think to something much more deep. But I'm going to say the first one is acknowledge what people are going through, right? There's a reason why as many as 50% of teachers have thought about quitting the profession at the end of the year. And God love them for saying the end of the year, right? I mean, that's a big commitment in terms of what we're facing and expecting people to do that they've never even had to deal with before. At the same time, they have their own issues. So one is acknowledging and appreciating what people are doing. You know, Lindsay, you also gave the statistics that are really striking and on the side of like counselors and social work and sort of the support system that schools and educators have typically relied on, whether it's to send the kid, but now whether to get the support from them. And it's just not enough. And obviously this leads into why, you know, Teamology's existence and what you're trying to do with Teamology is really important, is if you have nowhere to turn, right? Like I've got a problem and I know it's a problem and I can identify it and I sympathize and I care about this child or whatever it is, or even for the teacher themselves. And guess what? There's no support for you anywhere. Or, you know, when you get the call and you're trying to call in and you're trying to go see the doctor about something, they say, we have an appointment in 3 months.
Right,
That really doesn't help people. And so I think, and I'm heartened by the fact I consult for the state of California in the education system, and I'm hearing just how much money is starting to pour in. I'm not sure everyone's felt it yet, into the school systems, into early education, and into mental health. The question's gonna be, what do we do with that so it gets to the people who need it most? So I'm focused on, you know, obviously the children, but I know full well that really taking the time like we haven't done before, as some people say, never in our lifetimes has this much money and attention been paid to the education system, the early education system and mental health. How can we really help support the caring, responsive adults to be able to be empowered, be healthy themselves, and then support the children to have the good outcomes?
Right, and be strategic and not use it to check a box. As you know, kind of going back and as Justin has said, has been the culture, right, in education in the past. But I think we're dealing with such a crisis right now in children's mental and emotional health. And with our own educators that it's way too important to just this be a little check the box kind of decision. So Justin, do you have anything else, I'm sure, to add?
No, just to the point where we recently moved from one school district to the next school district, just because we wanted to move a little bit out further in the country and so forth, and found a nice piece of land and so forth. But we went from a school district that did temology to another school district that did temology, not knowing that. And I will say that both districts, when we come to helping parents, are doing a phenomenal job, because they're addressing social emotional learning at the school level, not just providing professional or services for the kids, providing professional development for the teachers, the administrators, from the school board to the superintendent to the whoever, are understanding what the teachers are going through.
Right.
So again, it kind of started at that district level where they are understanding what's happening. They're providing resources and strategies to teachers. They're giving teachers a systematic approach that's research-based, that works to teach to their students. And as a parent, I can hear my kid come home from school and say, Dad, in temology, Miss Oberly from Fort Cherry Elementary School did this today in class. And we learned this and we learned that. And seeing them do those things at home, as a parent, I'm like, oh, good. Because like, I need some help. And then, just my kids are, in their bedrooms on their computers right now, zooming into their classrooms. And I'm asking my son, he's like, the teacher just told me I have to do this. And it's not the expectations or rigors going down. It's the fact that he has COVID and he's trying to catch up with school, and he's trying to balance his physical health versus what he has to do in school. So I think in general, I think the schools doing this work, addressing this work, are helping parents. And I can, think of some schools that business as usual.
Yeah.
And parents are freaking out
Just
because those things aren't being taught.
I used to say in my pediatric practice, and I would teach residents in pediatrics, and I would say, if you don't ask a parent how they're sleeping during that first year's worth of visits, at least, you've completely missed the boat. Because here's the thing. If they're not sleeping well, the baby's not sleeping, the parents are sleeping, they're not going to hear anything else you say anyways. Well, the same holds true with a lot of things. It's not just sleep, right? It's physical health, mental health, stressors, all those things. That's why all of those other aspects, everything, to social determinants of health and food insecurity and, safety and all these things that you learn about sort of academically, that's why they all matter. Because if those aren't being considered, taken into account, you can talk to people and try to spout information at them all you want, but they're not going to hear you if they can't focus on what you're saying. And again, I always think back to that first year of life with kids, because if the kids are sleeping well, by the way, and the parents are sleeping well, it takes all of 10 seconds to ask the question. They say, oh, we're sleeping great, move on. But on those days where you come in and everybody is got issues and people are sick, they've got anxiety, mental health issues, whatever it is, you go with that, because that's where you get the impact, and the rest of it then, like I said before, falls into place.
Great. And we have one more minute. So I didn't get through all of my questions, but I knew I wouldn't, because we could have probably talked about each of these questions for an entire webinar. So I'm going to go to what I think is the most important piece before we transition into the next thing. But I'm going to kind of put two questions together. What advice would you give to a struggling teacher or parent right now, and struggles really based on pandemic? And I know that can be a lot of different things, but what's something general that you can kind of, from your expertise, you can kind of pass along to a struggling teacher or parent?
I would say you're not alone. And you're an advocate for your child, you're an advocate for your family, and don't be embarrassed or don't be worried about being judged if you go to your teacher or a teacher goes to their parent and says, listen, I'm having a tough time right now. My
Yeah.
child needs some help. I need some help. Or this isn't going as well as I think it should go. And have that open line of communication. Sometimes people are just, smiling and not sharing how they're feeling. And the old saying, if you don't tell me how you're feeling, I'll never know. And so I think it's sharing and talking about it and doing that at home and just the old school, I'm Italian, and old thing where we don't talk about our emotions and everything. That's out the door. We have to talk about our emotions, and it's very normal to do that. And if you think it's not normal, then you're kind of getting into the minority of the population, because we have to be upfront and we have to tell your teacher. Students have to advocate for themselves. We have to teach that more. Parents have to advocate. I'll just finish on this. Every time a parent will come into me as a principal for 10 years, I sit across my desk. I'm so sorry to bother you. I know you're busy. I just want to tell you what's going on in my child. I apologize if I'm taking your time. I'm like, listen, never apologize to me. If anything, you should apologize to me, or vice versa, because you're the number one advocate for your child. We're the school. Like we think we're doing the right thing, but you coming in here, you should never have to apologize to me. In fact, like, I would think differently of you if you didn't advocate for your child. You're the number one person to advocate for your child. Never feel like you shouldn't do it. You have to do it. It's your job. And teachers to principals and everyone to everyone, you have to speak up and let people know how you're feeling.
And I'll just wrap it up by just adding on to what Justin just said and say, if you think about it, it's not even just that we need to encourage people to do that because they need to do that to be okay themselves or to advocate for their child. But if we're going to shift the way we've thought about mental health and wellness, not just mental illness, and destigmatize it, there is huge value in children seeing adults, or bosses seeing employees, or whoever it may be, right? Principal seeing the teacher, when we actually acknowledge our feelings and emotions and struggles and things. And the irony is that we've grown up as a generation, we're supposed to hide those things at the same time that we realize how important it is that we teach them to our children. And I've always said, when I focused specifically on parenting for a lot of years, for the last 25 years, I'd always say, do as I say and not as I do never is a very good principle in any kind of aspect of parenting or teaching. And so to admit that you're struggling, or to talk about your feelings, or to go to the principal or have a parent come in and advocate, is actually modeling the kinds of things that we want children to learn, that Teamology is emphasizing. So I'll just add that to it. It's ironic that we kind of have to convince ourselves to do it, but we already know that that's what we want for our children.
That's great. No, normalizing those things. And I can remember from my days in the school, just being human. Sometimes kids don't, they don't see us the same as we actually are. They think that we, have superpowers for real, I think sometimes. So when you actually say to a child, I've struggled with this or that, I can remember students kind of being like, really? Like, you actually have like trouble with things? So normalizing that is, I think, really critical, especially right now. So thank you both so much for your wisdom and expertise. And I would love for you to stay on as panelists as we transition. We're going to eventually bring the rest of our crew on to talk about some of their experience. And before we do that, though, Erica Patillo is going to do a little trivia for the next few minutes as we get everybody in place for the last part of our event.
Can everyone hear me?
Yes, we can.
All right. Hello, everyone. As Lindsay said, my name is Erica Patillo, and I am the Director of Product Development with Teamology. And we thought to just kind of break this up a little bit as we get the panelists on, we would do some trivia, and you could have the opportunity to win a Teamology t-shirt. So I'm going to ask a couple questions, and Elisa is going to drop up, she just did, our website in the chat. So if you're not very familiar with Teamology, I encourage you to take a look at that website, and it will help you answer some of these questions. So whoever is able to answer the question first correctly in the chat, we will make sure we get a t-shirt sent out to you. So our first question is, what is the mission behind Teamology? So I'll give you a second to look that up if you're not familiar with that, and type the answer in the chat. All right, we have an answer. Noelle, it looks like you're first. And yes, the answer, our mission is to understand and improve emotional health in order to enhance every child's abilities to succeed in school, career, and life. So thank you very much. Our next question, what college is in partnership with Teamology? There we go, Dawn. Great job, Penn State. Thank you. Can you name all of Teamology's characters? There are 6 of them.
Erica, I feel like we need the Jeopardy background
know,
noise or
the
music.
Up, here we go. Noelle, again, great job. Yes.
Nice.
Harper, Paco, Amelia, Ruby, Philo, and Lamar. Those are our Teamology characters. And I'm just going to do one last question that is going to, yes, Megan, you will get a t-shirt. One last question that will kind of lead us into our panelist discussion. What is the name of Teamology's new AI platform? Ruby is who is highlighted right now in that new platform, but the name of the AI platform is actually called TeamTalk, and we're going to be talking about that next. So, Michelle, thank you very much. All right, and we will make sure that we get Teamology swag, Teamology t-shirts out to all of you. Thank you.
Thanks so much, everyone, for your engagement, and for Erica for leading that fun trivia. I think we're all set to transition into our next portion of the event. To kick us off, we're actually going to share a quick video to give some context to the audience of what TeamTalk is, and then we will bring the rest of our panelists up and get started with our question and answer for the remainder of the event.
Hi, I'm Ruby, and I want to introduce you to Teamology's new intuitive platform, Team Talk. As some of you know, I'm always trying to help kids bounce back and learn how to be resilient. We now have a way for every kid to learn these social, emotional strategies by having a conversation with me or one of my friends on Team Talk. This intuitive experience is easy and safe for students to use in the classroom or virtual setting. Each student receives individual support and coaching. Team Talk can even assist in small group and classroom settings. The process starts with a screening process to help adults better understand students' resilience and how they are doing overall around social and emotional wellness. After we have our conversation, the session ends with another self-rating by the child to assess the conversation. In our pilot program, 100% of the students indicated they preferred talking to me versus an adult. Not only will Team Talk alleviate pressure on school staff, it will provide coaching to students in real time and notify adults in the school if and when further intervention may be needed. Let me introduce you to Lindsay Covert, CEO and founder of Teamology, to give you more insight into Team Talk.
Thanks, Ruby. Research is showing that the social and emotional needs of kids is at an all-time high. We at Teamology understand educators need tools that can better support their efforts and not give them one more thing to do. Social and emotional learning is critical for all students, and we want to provide innovative tools and support exactly where the needs are. Team Talk will triage student needs to alleviate stress on an already overstressed system and meet the needs of the students faster. As Ruby mentioned, there are two highlights to the hybrid technology. The first is an evidence-aligned resilience screening, which is a gamified conversation where we look at relevant information and we can put the individual and aggregated reports back to the school. The second is coaching with Ruby. This experience allows students to freely have a conversation about anything they might need more support with and receive tips and strategies in real time. We can't tell you how amazing it's been to hear the feedback from students and educators on how helpful this tool has been in our pilot and beta schools. Thank you for all you do every day for your students. We can't wait to get Team Talk into the hands of more educators and students and would love to work with you.
Okay, so just to give some context into what the tool was, we thought that would be helpful to show the video. So I'm so excited to introduce you to our next panel of amazing educators who have worked alongside us as we've looked to gain insight and understanding around how to best support students' social, emotional, and mental health needs. The Teamology team has spent the last almost 3 years researching and developing what's now known as Team Talk. Team Talk is an intuitive student-facing platform that includes two separate tools, as you saw in the video. One is the individualized student screening. This is a gamified, conversationalized, evidence-aligned screening used to collect critical data around resilience and social and emotional wellness and provide individual and aggregated data back to the schools. The second is coaching with Ruby. This personalized experience is where students have the ability to chat with Ruby or eventually one of our other characters, which we're hoping to launch in 2022, in real time to learn tips and strategies that can support their social and emotional health in and out of the school. So thank you all for joining us. We have Megan McGuire, school principal at Fairview Elementary in Waynesboro, Pennsylvania. Carrie Layden, joining us all the way from sunny Florida, kindergarten teacher. And Jen Ford, school counselor in Canemak School District out towards Pittsburgh. Welcome, ladies.
Good afternoon.
Hi.
So to get us started, I wanted to kind of give you guys an opportunity to just share generally your thoughts around Team Talk and Teamology. And then I have a list of questions. We're just going to go back and forth, and feel free. We still have Laura and Justin joining us to add to or ask questions as well. And we're just going to operate kind of informally. Megan, would you like to start?
I can go ahead and start. So as Lindsay said, I'm an elementary school principal in Waynesboro, Pennsylvania. We are a district that actually was part of the pilot of the original project team many, many eons ago. But I would say in the last 3 years, we've done a complete reboot around what is teamology, and really incorporating that in our day-to-day, just who we are as a school. In so doing, we've really turned our building around, and saw a 92% drop in our discipline, and are now really focused on common vocabulary, common expectations, and really just the sense of community that teamology has kind of brought to us. So we are very excited about how it is already changed our school for the better and helped our kiddos and helped everybody have, like I said, that common language to be able to talk about what's going on and what do they need to do. And what's happening right now and all those kinds of things. So we are very excited as we're looking forward to Team Talk. We have not yet utilized Team Talk, but we're kind of in the process of all the restrictions around those things and getting it adopted and getting it up and running with our district. But we are very excited about the ability to kind of take the characters that our kids are already really connected to, those concepts that they already really understand, and be able to utilize that to the next level to really start screening and be able to triage our kids and help them get the support that they need. We have over 600 kids and 1 guidance counselor. So the ability to kind of get some of this triaging and information out there. And I'm just really, really, really excited about the report of information that comes out of that. And frankly, I think the most exciting thing to me about teamology itself and Team Talk is that the goal is never to replace the adult and to replace the human element. It is to kind of take some of that back end work out, start the conversation with these kids, help them understand how, how to have that conversation, like Justin was saying, how important it is to talk about things. So it gives them a way to start that conversation. But Ruby always pushes those kids back to who's somebody in your real world that you can go and talk to about this, and do you want to practice that conversation? So I think that's going to be just huge for helping our kids really learn the skills that they need to learn to truly make them resilient, and the rest of our foundations that they need. So we're really excited to be a part of it, as with everything in teamology.
Thank you, Megan. Carrie?
Hi, well, I had a unique experience with Team Talk. I was not familiar with the teamology. So my students are kindergarten students, and I have a class of 20. So it was really neat to see them kind of become more aware of social emotional. And our driving question was usually, what do I do if I'm upset? Because that was kind of the general way I could get them to relate to being resilient. So it was really exciting to see them be engaged with this. And I even got to see some firsthand situations where they used the skills they learned from Ruby.
Awesome. Thank you, Carrie. We're excited to learn more. And Jen?
So I was very lucky in that I got to utilize Team Talk with my counseling students. So I have, kind of going back to that ratio you spat out at the beginning, Lindsay, I have over 500 kiddos that I am responsible for as a school counselor. And I'm actually split between 2 buildings. So when Team Talk was presented to my administrator, she was like, Jen, this could be amazing for you. You're not here all the time, but it's a way that you can feel more here, even when you're not here. And that's absolutely what it did for me. I felt like I could be 2 places at once, because even if I wasn't present in my building, I still had the ability to to have other professionals in the building, the special education teacher, a paraprofessional here and there, to sit with a student while they had a session with Ruby, so that they were still getting things that they needed, and I was getting data that I needed, and I wasn't even there, so it really did help me and my ability to be 2 places at once. It helped to triage kiddos who needed attention now, but it also helped me to see maybe some kids that weren't on my radar as kids that needed some additional support from me or from Ruby, or just in general, overall from other adults in the building. So I think that Team Talk was a really great experience for our district, and it helped me, just in my unique role.
Awesome. Thanks, Jen. And can I ask how many students you have?
It's a little over 550. I think it's like 569 or something like that. So I'm right in 500 and 600.
Yep, I was just going to say, I'm looking over at Megan. It sounds like that's about where her school counselor is. So maybe that number 500 is even a little bit low. But to think about one person trying to service all of the needs now after pandemic, before the pandemic, it was impossible, right? And now when you look at the data, it's just overwhelming, I'm sure. So thank you all for your quick background on the connection to Teamology and Team Talk. I want to dig into some of kind of the details because I know that might be some of what the audience is looking for. Can you describe, and when I say describe, kind of paint the picture of how Team Talk was implemented? So where was it in your school? I know that you both, and I'm looking at Carrie and Jen specifically with this. Where did your students participate? What did that look like? You both have two very different experiences to kind of make sure that that's understood. So Carrie brought Team Talk in as a classroom tool. So she worked along, it was a co-facilitator tool, whereas Jen used the tool more on a one-to-one basis. So if you could both kind of describe that experience and just detail some of, you know, how was it easy? What were the challenges? That sort of thing.
Oh, okay. I'll go ahead and start. So as I had stated, I have a classroom of 20 kindergarten students. So usually, typically, we would all come sit at the carpet at the front of the classroom. We have a smart board in front of the classroom where all the students can see the screen. And that's how we would connect with Ruby. And so students, basically, when we started the conversation, I would read to the students what Ruby was saying, some of the questions she was asking and prompts she was giving. And then I would just have my students raise their hand to participate, sometimes raise their hand, sometimes just pull a stick and for someone to participate. But they were eager to participate, so that was good. So if Ruby requested the kids do some sort of activity, it was in a whole group setting. So yeah, I mean, that was kind of the way we did things. And I was the facilitator, I guess you could say.
Had to do it once. I was muted. Jen, your experience was very, very different because you didn't pull Team Talk into the classroom. So could you just describe kind of how those students were selected, where the tool was set up, all of those different questions?
Sure. So for most of last year, and especially around the time that we rolled this out, we were fully remote for a period of time. And then we were hybrid. So the kids were attending half of the week. I used Google Classroom to kind of roll everything out to them. We did the screener with our kids, and we decided to focus on the 3rd and 4th grade students just because they were older, they could navigate the screener a little bit better. So that was probably a chunk of, I'd say, between 100 and 120 kids that we assigned the screener to, you know, for them to participate in. And through the screener, it allowed me to see what students needed some help in those resilience building skills. And from there, I was able to, you know, look at some of those kiddos and, you know, there were some kiddos that were popping up on, you know, our well checklist or that were popping up on lists of teachers' concerns. And then there were some kids that their names came out of left field. Like we had no idea they were struggling because maybe they were fully remote for the year, or maybe they just were really good at masking. And speaking of masks, we all had masks on anyways. We couldn't see anybody's faces. So that screener process really did help me to see exactly who needed the extra time with Ruby. And the kids were extremely excited about it. They thought it was so cool that they could talk to Ruby. At that point, that was our 3rd year of doing Teamology in the building. So the characters were larger than life to them. They loved the characters. They thought it was the neatest experience ever to talk to Ruby. So through that screening process was how I was able to narrow down exactly what kids we were going to focus on with Ruby, and then just what kids needed a little more extra attention in general after that.
Thanks, Jen. And I actually want to dig into some of what you shared too, because I think you mentioned something that's really important, and that is oftentimes the kids that are probably in your higher tier 2, kind of going towards tier 3, they get on your radar, right? There's no doubt that you know those kids in your school, but with a ratio of almost 600 kids to you, and resources low and scarce, there were, as you mentioned, there were some out of left field. And what were your immediate thoughts on that, and how did you handle that in terms of the coaching, and kind of how did that all look as far as making sure that those kids got the support that they needed?
So I think another element that I didn't really touch on, I know the video touched on briefly, was the reports that come out from the screening process. So a really important tool in addition to Ruby was just that sharing of that information. So those reports went to the teachers, and they also went to the parents. And I think just bringing all of that information to light was a huge piece as well. And helping the kids that we did select. So that reporting process too is also extremely important.
Thank you. Could you, either of you, provide some specific examples, whether it was in the classroom or the one-on-one, on how students were responding to Team Talk? What was some of the feedback that you received from your students, and how were they explaining whether the tool was helpful or not?
So I can speak to that, Lindsay. I was lucky enough to observe a couple situations where the kids actually recognized a situation where they could use some of the strategies that Ruby taught them. So one example, we were having a school event, and there was a lot of students in one area. It was outside, and there was even parents there. And, our kids aren't used to that. Obviously, we're not used to getting together in large groups. So one of my students, she started feeling a lot of anxiety, and it was coming out in tears and panicky kind of. So, it was hard to see. And we together, I tried to calm her down by breathing and stuff like this. But toward the end of the event, as we're walking back to the classroom, we're about to walk in, and she said, I know what I'm going to do to feel better. I'm going to go right in my journal, and I'm going to draw how I feel. And that was one of the coping strategies that Ruby had taught us. So that was so cool to see that these things are starting to stick with them. The resiliency thing, they can get it. And it was neat to see. There was one more example I wanted to share real quick. And these are 5-year-olds. So this is pretty cool. There was a boy who was upset. He had accidentally knocked down his friend's blocks of towers, so he was crying. He was upset that he hurt his friend's, feelings. And so another student, not in the situation, came over. She came over to his side, and she started doing our hands like this. When we're doing deep breathing, we go like this in our classroom. And she started doing that with him. And totally unprompted. And he started doing it too. And then a couple minutes later, I asked him, I was like, do you feel better? I didn't want to interrupt at all. I was loving just observing. I said, do you feel better now? And he goes, yeah. And I go, really, what helped? And he goes, just taking deep breaths. And he had totally moved on from that situation. So I thought that was really cool.
That's amazing. Wow. What an opportunity for you to kind of see the connection. Awesome. Thank you for sharing that.
Proud. So proud.
So cool. Jen, did you have any specific examples that you could share?
Yeah, so there was one instance that I can think of where I had a student who had been working with Ruby for a while, and she had maybe 3 or 4 sessions. So this was probably her third, I would say, this was the first time that she really sat down and told Ruby about something that was really weighing on her, like a real problem that she, maybe kind of kept more to herself before that. And, she had this session with Ruby. She talked about it. And then I always asked the kids as I was working with them, I said to them, some of them I typed for because they wanted to talk faster than they could type. Some of them, wanted space and privacy when they worked. And I told them, that is your space and your privacy, knowing, and on my end, that there's the safety net of, you guys alerting me if there was something concerning coming up in the session. And some of them wanted me to read everything. Now, she was one that wanted the privacy all the time. At the end, I always said to them, you know, is there anything you want to tell me about your time with Ruby? And so she said, I'm going to tell you the whole story of what I told Ruby. And I was like, oh, well, that's awesome. And what finally came about from the whole thing was that after she talked to Ruby, she felt like her problem was actually worth being talked about. Because she said, I've talked to my mom about stuff like this before, and I don't feel like she listens, like she just kind of downplays it. So it was a little thing that happened between a friend that sometimes as adults, like we do tend to think like, oh, that's not a big deal, but it was weighing so heavily on her. It was a big deal to her. And so that she felt heard through Ruby and she felt like she wasn't being judged, I think was so huge for her. And then when she shared that story with me and she got the same kind of no judgment, like, yes, this really did affect you, like that validation, I think it really helped her to realize that her problems aren't, you know, insignificant, that they're there, but she also can work through them. So that was a really interesting example that I can think of from my time with working with Ruby.
Well, and what a great example of Ruby being a bridge to you. So that's a really important piece of this tool, is that, yes, we want kids to be able to feel safe and like you're saying, heard and validated, but we also want to encourage those same students to find a trusted adult so that they can build that relationship that we discussed as we launched into this event early on. So thank you. That's awesome. That's amazing. So I'd like to kind of come over to you, Megan, and get your thoughts on what you believe, because we're in the process of your district adopting Team Talk. What is the value for this kind of tech solution from your perspective?
I think it's a huge resource for us as a school district, like we've talked about before, like just the adult to student ratio is so huge. And for our counselor to be able to reach all of our kids is just impossible. And I'm most excited, I think, and we kind of as a school team here at Fairview are most excited about like what Carrie and Jen have kind of touched on here, those kids who we don't necessarily know something is wrong. We know who our high flyer externalizing behavior kids are. I know the kids who are going to throw a chair, who are going to rip the things up, who are going to stomp out of the classroom. Those kids are, we know who they are. We kind of already have support plans in place for them. Families are already aware. People are already talking to them. Yes, they have high needs, but they also have high supports just by the nature of what they're doing. But the kiddos who are just struggling internally and really just not learning those skills that they need to learn. And I think, how exciting it would be if we can catch these 3rd, 4th, 5th graders and start teaching them, like Jen said, that your problem is significant. You are important. How you're feeling is normal, is expected, is okay. You're not alone. And there are appropriate ways to have this conversation. And I really like just playing with it. Like I had said before, if you say, Ruby will say, how's school going? And of course I had to play the system out. So I typed all kinds of things about how stupid school is and everyone hates me and my teachers are horrible. And, when you put all of those things in, Ruby's response is always coming back to, why do you feel that way? And trying to help the kid kind of unpack that a little bit for themselves. But also then she says, have you told anyone that? Have you talked to anyone about that already? So there's like another skill that child needs, and then bringing it into who could you go talk to? But my favorite thing was then she says, do you want to practice that conversation? What? Yes, for my super shy, anxiety-ridden kid who doesn't think they matter, be able to practice that. And sometimes I think some of those kids, just practicing that conversation with themselves might be enough to really kind of get over that hump and kind of get themselves to the other side of it. But for some of those other kids, being able to identify who a trusted adult could be, being able to practice how to appropriately have that conversation. I think about how I, as a parent, have raised 3 girls of my own and how much I do that with them. Okay, well, tomorrow you need to go back and talk to them. And what are you going to say? And well, what are you going to say if they say this back? And, all those pieces. I think it's just really exciting that Ruby and this Team Talk would be able to do that. And like I said, the fact that it's familiar characters, that our kids really do know who these characters are. And when you look at kind of Ruby the Muppet, you're kind of like, wait, what? Like, as an adult, but these kids, they know who they are. Like, that's a superstar. Like, you don't even understand. Those are superheroes to our kids. And they know what those things are. And we've already had so many moments where our kids help each other. You know, they'll stop me in the hallway, Mrs. McGuire, so-and-so was doing this, but I was a Harper helper and I did this to help them, blah, blah, blah. Wait, maybe I was a philo problem solver. You know? So they'll go through and process the whole thing. But I think it's really exciting to be able to give kids time who need time in a way that is non-threatening for them, is measurable for us in terms of even just how many times is that kid asking to go back to Ruby. The data that's going to come back, like Jen had said, knowing as an administrator, as an adult in a school system, that if that child says any of those dangerous things, I may not be in that conversation, but I'm going to know, and we're going to be able to follow up on that, you know, through that fail-safe system that exists in there. That gives a lot of, kind of take some of that pressure release valve off of that. And to know, if I put myself in a parent's shoe, if I'm trying to talk to a parent saying, I want your child to go through this screener, you don't have to worry, because the screener isn't replacing mental health. This is facilitating mental health. This is facilitating support for your child, because it's constantly, even when you get into the coaching part of it, not just the screener part, but the coaching part, Ruby pushes them to an adult or to a person. And I just can't get, there's plenty of programs out there that we can teach kids skills, and they can go through lessons and do all of those things. And some of them are very interactive and whatever, but it's not teaching our kids to talk to real people. And I think the pandemic has highlighted how little our kids are actually talking to each other. And in some ways it's actually normalized not talking and typing in text and little blurbs, and made it more normal than even it used to be before that, to just paint a rosy picture for social media for all, you know, all intents and purposes. So I just think that when I look at why would we bring this in, and I'm talking to the school board, and I'm talking to superintendents, and I'm talking to parents, this is to facilitate mental health and wellness for our kids, not to replace the counselor, not to replace any of the other adults, but to help the kids appropriately advocate for and seek the support of those adults to get what they need. And I just think that is monumental for our kids in this school system. And I just think it's going to pay extreme dividends, especially to our anxious kids who don't like to talk, they feel like they need too much, so they try to stay out of the way. You know, we all know those kids who, I'm fine compared to somebody else, I'm fine. You know, and this is a tool for those kids in particular, all the way up to the kid who's throwing a chair, you know, and I think that's a huge thing.
Wow. Thank you, Megan. That was like perfectly put. I couldn't have said it better. I love the way that you're describing the facilitation, and really it's a place where they're heard. You know, I had a conversation, actually, I know Justin had to leave, but with a group of his students over the summer at the Readiness Institute, who were 16, 17, 18 years old. And, you know, we had a great discussion around just validation and the idea that, you know, throughout the day, if we just had somebody or something that told us, look, our feelings are valid, and how, you know, and just listening, like that can totally change somebody's day. And when you have a child who doesn't feel heard and is sitting with those thoughts or sitting with those feelings and unsure how to express them, which I think is happening so much more now with it, like you said, Megan, with the pandemic, because we've all experienced some level of trauma. And for those kids who were already experiencing things prior to the pandemic, and then we put that on top of it, there's just there's a need for tools that are able to really reach kids where they seem to be unreachable right now. So that's the hope, I think, with Team Talk. And as you said, not to replace people at all, actually to facilitate those conversations, to help kids understand where they can go and who they can talk to. So thank you for all of that. That was really well said. So I want to talk then just about, well, first I want to back up a little bit and just speak to what's kind of the danger word detection that is built into the tool. It was really important for us to be able to identify when kids need a lot more help than what Ruby can provide. So we do get any kind of trigger from both the screener and the coaching will indicate if a child is expressing any kind of thoughts of hurting themselves, others, or destroying property. Immediate information is sent to the school, and the child knows that in both situations. They have to agree that Ruby is happy to have a conversation, but if any of that is indicated throughout the process or experience, she's going to let somebody know, a trusted adult know. So that was a really important part too. And we've kind of touched on some of this, but just I'm putting it out to all three of you, and Laura, feel free to join in too if you'd like to. But what do you think the biggest pain points of educators and students, and just in general, schools, parents, what are the biggest pain points, and how do you think this can benefit any one of those populations? Because I think the influence of Team Talk isn't just supposed to be in school. It's supposed to be helpful for the child when they come home and in a lot of different environments.
I will say very quickly, I think one of the things that is very heightened right now, I always try and put myself in a parent's shoes and those kinds of things. And we talk about that these kids don't feel seen and they don't feel heard. From a very, very real standpoint, if I am a parent who is struggling to put food on the table, struggling to keep a house, roof over your head and all those kinds of things, whether you have a best friend right now really doesn't matter, right? As a parent, I really can't devote what needs to happen to that, to really sit and process. I'm trying to process, what time do I have to go to bed? How are you going to get, all those kinds of things. And that's really, really heightened for some of our families right now. But if that child has the language to communicate those things succinctly and appropriately to a parent, but also to these other people, I think that's one of those big pain points that can help that kid, where a parent really can't do some of that. It's just too much on a parent, but I've also watched when our kids use this language with parents, I can't tell you how many times, and Lindsay and I've had some really funny conversations where I've called home with a parent about something with discipline, or a parent calls into me and they will say, I don't know who this Ruby is that my kid keeps talking about, but, or I don't know what this Philo thing is. I don't even know where that name came from, whatever. I'll be like, well, let's talk about what that is. Because when kids come to my office for discipline, whether it's positive or negative, we talk about which of the 6 foundations and characters that is related to. So our kids are very well versed in, but they're teaching our parents, and I think that is the coolest thing when these kids, you guys talk about them teaching, working with their peers and helping them do the breathing activities. I love listening to my kids say something to a parent where it's like, what you could do, Mom, did you try such and such? So I think that's one of those pain points where we're empowering kids not only to have their own voice, but we're empowering them to see that they can make a difference and teach something to a parent, a sibling, a friend that is helpful. And that just builds that whole child that we have to build.
Amazing.
So I think that's a really cool piece of it.
Awesome.
I think another thing too is that, when we talked about in the beginning of the discussion with Dr. Jana and Mr. Alio, the lack of mental health services, not just in schools, but just in the community these days, for so long, this is just another resource that we have as a school, because ultimately parents, when they are desperate and they know that their child needs something, but they're not able to get them in until 3 months from now to talk to someone about their problems, they're going to be looking to the school like, what else can you do to help me? Just that we're in the field, we're triaging things. So this is just another resource that we have, another tool in our back pockets to help to fulfill just a greater need in our community, that stems from the lack of mental health services.
Great point. Definitely.
I'll just jump in for what Jen just said. I think probably most people have heard, the American Academy of Pediatrics has put out several statements along with other major organizations in the country around just how significant and how serious the mental health concerns are for children in the United States, right? So if you want to look at it from a bigger picture standpoint, you think, okay, schools, you're seeing kids every day. You're stretched thin in terms of the resources to deal with those kids, but if you can help find them, And while it may take, a long time to get into the mental health specialists, this is the top agenda item for pediatricians. I mean, yes, COVID is, right? You got the viral top agenda, but next to that, you've got the mental health one that has now risen to the top of every medical organization in the country. So the good news is, and Lindsay and I've talked about this, and we've even talked about opportunities for what Teamology could do in the health space and healthcare space as well. This is the common language, right? The language and the concepts and the skills and resiliency and things that you have in Teamology are at the core of what people talk about with trauma-informed care. When you look at social determinants of health, when you look at life trajectories of kids, when you're looking at health outcomes, this is the core. So again, it's really relevant in the education system, but I thought I'd toss in that, first of all, you have allies with pediatricians, at least, who are also very overwhelmed, but this being a priority. And you're speaking, everybody, part of my goal, because I go between the sectors a lot, is how do we make sure that everybody knows we're all speaking, if we speak the same language, we're all talking about the same thing. And really what we're doing is we're shifting, systems are shifting to be child-centric. Right? It used to be, profession institution centric, right? This school building, this hospital, this clinic, and everything was kind of contained in those four walls. If you're child centric, it's who are all those people in that child's orbit that can serve as the caring, responsive adult. And if we speak the same language, what becomes very clear is we all have these same goals. So again, that's my pitch for that the healthcare and the pediatricians are the allies in this, because we have just the same sort of vested interest as education.
Thank you, Laura. Wow. And I'm looking, we're already over time. We could have continued this conversation, I feel like, all night long. I do want to encourage, if the audience, I wish we would have given a little more time for question and answer, but I feel like we were kind of honed in on some really important things. So I wanted to stay in the conversation. There was a question from Noel just about, in terms of the students typing into the system. This is the number one piece of feedback that we have received in all of our beta and testing settings, that we really need to get the voice to text so that we can get the full K up through high school opportunity with Team Talk. So it is high on our list with the next iteration. We've already talked to developers about it. So at the moment, it's still typing in, and it's more of a chat feature in terms of the communication and experience, but it is coming. I promise you, it is high on our priority list. So thank you for the question. Are there any other questions that that the audience has for our final panelists, as we're already 2 minutes past our time? I'll give a minute to see. And any last minute comments from the panelists as we're waiting on any questions in the chat. Thank you, Elisa. Our link was put in the chat to get any more information that you're looking for, can be found on our website. We also have social handles, LinkedIn, Instagram, and Facebook. Am I missing one, Elisa? I think I got them all. They're all, we are Teamology, I believe. Yep, thank you. Twitter, Twitter too. Okay, so with that being said, I want to thank the panelists for joining us tonight, for all of your experience, words of wisdom, expertise. We're so appreciative. And thank you, audience, for attending and joining us. Your time is so much appreciated to learn more about social and emotional and how it's connected to technology and what we're doing at Teamology to help. So take care, everyone. Have a great night.